I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Saturday, May 20th, 2023. Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. If you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S., Alaska, Hawaii to the lower left. Point and click anywhere on this map and get a forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories anywhere in the country. On this Saturday afternoon of note, in these areas shaded in gray, across the central northern Rockies, those are air quality alerts due to smoke from the wildfires up in western Canada. It's been a very early and active wildfire season in British Columbia and Alberta, and that smoke at times has been drifting down into the continental U.S. Here in Alaska, it's active. River breakup underway. Ice jam and snowmelt flooding remain threats. We're monitoring areas around Kobuk, Kwethluk, as well as Glen Ellen and Gulkana in the Copper River basins, where warnings and advisories are still in effect. Warm temperatures have been occurring in east central interior. It could be even an isolated thunderstorm pop-up as we go through Sunday afternoon and again on Monday afternoon, though temperatures will not be quite as warm as what they were. It was as warm as 86 degrees in the southern part of the Panhandle on Thursday at Klawak. And yesterday, Friday afternoon, it was 80 at Fairbanks. And we'll also watch an area of low pressure that will bring some gale force winds and rain to sections of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island early next week, especially on Monday. In the far north along the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik, fog, low clouds, temperature at 34 degrees. Further south, sunny skies on the Kobuk River there, Shungnak reporting sunny skies 53. And then further south and west along the upstream from Bethel, Kwethluk still under a flood warning for ice jams, but the river there, you can see in the background, high waters, partly sunny, 56 degrees. And Fairbanks enjoying partly cloudy skies. Temperature as of early afternoon was in lower 70s at 72 degrees. And as I mentioned, a few isolated showers or storms could pop up here in the next couple of days. Looking at the current advisory map, we have flood watches in effect for the upper Yukon region, including the Yukon Flats, Fort Yukon, where Porcupine River comes in. There's been a pretty good push of water coming in out of Canada from snowmelt. So flood watch remains in effect there through this weekend and early next week. The central area of the Yukon River, especially from, say, Ruby down through Galena, Kaltag, this area here still could see some ice jam flooding. Also areas further downstream want to pay attention because all that ice and water has yet to move down your way. And then the lower portion of the Kuskokwim River Basin to the Delta under a flood watch here through the rest of this weekend. And we still have flood warnings there, Kwethluk, and that one up at Kobuk there east of Ambler. We have an advisory, Tanana, down just downstream from there, and another flood advisory continues in effect for areas of the Copper River Basin, Moose Creek near Glen Ellen, and also areas along the old Edgerton Highway where the Copper River flows. There's been some minor flooding. This map again reiterates the flood watches here and the areas undergone. What we're going to see in the week ahead is that the breakup will continue expanding further north and west across the Brooks Range into the North Slope, and then the western Brooks Range has yet to see the rivers break up. We have yet to see that push of ice and higher water get down into the lower Yukon Delta, so this will be the area to watch in the week ahead. Also the lower Kuskokwim. So the best thing to do is move and safeguard property before the high water and ice arrives. Have extra food, batteries, and medical supplies ready. Know your community safety plan and emergency shelter locations if it gets bad. And stay out of the floodwaters and ice once they develop. Here is the area where fire danger is highest. We have very high fire danger areas of the east central interior, but at least fortunately no winds to really drive critical fire conditions. Otherwise there might be red flag warnings like there were the past couple of afternoons. On the satellite imagery, here's an area of low pressure now just south of Sand Point, and and there's going to be another low come up out of the North Pacific and kind of come across the same area here as we go into Monday. Otherwise, weak ridge of high pressure remains across north and central areas of the state. There's a stronger mid and upper level ridge back into Canada, but this ridge has lost some of its influence. It's not quite as strong as it was here as the middle and latter half of this past week. So as we go through tonight, early on Sunday, low pressure will be sitting there just on the southern portion of the Alaska Peninsula. Ridge of high pressure nudges up into the Gulf. Another ridge of high pressure at the surface there along areas of the North Slope. And then on Sunday afternoon, here comes that next low, and it could be some scattered showers in western portions of Canada and up here into east central portions of our interior, with perhaps a rumble of thunder possible. By Monday afternoon, here comes that next low with some gale force winds and moderate to locally briefly heavier rains along sections the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island as that feature pulls on up toward the north and northwest. Temperatures then for tonight, lows above freezing in the 40s in the Panhandle and generally 30s, upper 30s to lower 40s across South Central. Temperatures on Sunday, maybe around or just above 60 at Talkeetna, Glen Allen, generally in the 50s, Anchorage, and also generally in the 50s across the Panhandle, few areas flirting with 60. Above freezing now, temperatures across the area on Monday morning and afternoon. Temperatures with a little bit of sun could be up as warm as 66 there at Glen Allen. In the far north, temperatures now are above freezing across the Yukon River Valley, so that's going to allow any ice there to continue to melt and more runoff coming from the higher elevation and the heavy snowpack from this past winter. Temperatures below freezing along the Brooks Range spine in North Slope. Temperatures, you can see some 70s pop up here Sunday afternoon, 73 there at both Eagle and Fort Yukon, the forecast high. And again, temperatures along the Yukon River Valley above freezing, facilitating that further snowmelt. And temperatures Monday afternoon 60s and even middle 70s possible here and through the Yukon Flats. So another isolated thunderstorm could pop up then. Southwest, temperatures also generally above freezing. And as we go into Sunday afternoon, we're going to see temperatures as we go up Bethel up the Kuskokwim River in the 50s, even 62 at McGrath. And on Monday morning, we expect low temperatures to remain above freezing in the lower YK deltas and certainly across the Aleutians. And Monday afternoon, temperatures back up into the 50s, especially north and east of Bethel. Still cooler 40s along the southwest coast, and that's where the cooler temperatures are going to prevail here up through the end of May. This has been the cool spot for weeks now. Below normal temperatures have been centered on this region of the state, and that will likely continue through the end of May. Maybe a little moderation in the far north along the north slope and northeastern portion of the interior, near normal in through the Panhandle, and precipitation overall near normal for a change along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle, maybe a little above normal with a slight lean toward a little bit more above normal along the western coast, Norton Sound, Nome down through Bethel to Kotzebue.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you have a flight plan Sunday or on Monday, you continue to see IFR conditions rather extensive along the Beaufort Sea coastline of the Arctic coast down through the lower Chukchi Sea, between the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence, west of there as well, and down across areas of the lower Bering Sea. MVFR prevalent across much of the Gulf Coast and the Gulf, with VFR conditions throughout much of the interior, especially along the Yukon River Valley. And for Sunday afternoon, generally VFR conditions will prevail across much of the mainland, though we could see some cumulus buildups here. East central areas, Tok on up toward Chicken, Eagle, with perhaps even a few isolated thunderstorms developing with the daytime heating, as temperatures will still be warm here through the upper half of the Yukon Valley. For Monday morning, fairly widespread VFR conditions across the mainland, MVFR, especially central eastern Alaska Range, Copper River Valley, and all along the Gulf Coast, Panhandle, and then further west, widespread MVFR conditions with some IFR. Another low is going to be coming up out of the North Pacific toward the southern half of the Alaska Peninsula, bringing IFR conditions with it, lower ceilings and some heavier rain and rain showers. And then by Monday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions, especially on the east side of Kodiak Island, an area out toward the southeast Bering, including St. Paul and St. George. And up there along just off of the northwest Arctic coast, an isolated storm could redevelop up through the upper Yukon Valley Monday afternoon. So as far as pass conditions go, Anatuvik Pass Sunday is looking VFR, though MVFR conditions will lurk further north of the north entrance. Same thing at Adigan Pass there along the Brooks Range. VFR conditions should generally hold Sunday, but MVFR as you fly north there of the north entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, MVFR conditions are anticipated in the morning, giving way to VFR. Rainy Pass, same thing, MVFR becoming VFR. Windy Pass should generally see VFR conditions on Sunday, as will Isabel Pass. Further east, Mentasta should generally see MVFR conditions with some cumulus buildups and perhaps an isolated thunderstorm developing as you fly north of the north entrance. And then down toward Tanita Pass, VFR conditions becoming MVFR. And Portage Pass should see MVFR conditions in the morning become VFR, especially along through the eastern half of Portage Pass. And then in the far northern panhandle, Chilkoot and White will start out MVFR, giving way to VFR conditions by late morning and especially afternoon. So looking at freezing levels aloft, we still have a warm ridge of high pressure in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere over Canada, extending ridge axis through central Alaska along the Yukon River and then out into the northern Bering, but it's not as pronounced as it was a few days ago. And we expect the coolest readings, low pressure here out over the Bering Sea, also another low coming up out of the North Pacific. As far as icing threat, we could see a few scattered showers in areas of western Canada and up here into the interior. We have the system that could bring a little more in the way of some rain coming up in the Alaska Peninsula, especially by Monday. But otherwise, freezing levels are above 4,000 and 6,000 feet along the coast and above 8,000 and even 10,000 feet across areas of the interior. Jet stream level winds not especially impressive, though we do have a northwesterly 90-95 knot jet core from the lower Gulf into the North Pacific with a low circulation just north of the eastern Aleutians and a high up here along areas of the northwestern portion of the mainland. At 700 millibars, low pressure circulation there is over the eastern Aleutians, a broad belt of 35 to as high as 45 knot winds from areas of the southwest coast down to south of the Alaska Peninsula into the North Pacific. And then as we look at 3,000 feet, we find that low circulation there just north of the eastern Aleutians and the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, with that next low coming out of the North Pacific with some stronger winds that'll be pushing up across the Alaska Peninsula and around Kodiak Island by the time we get into Monday and early Tuesday. Ridge of high pressure continues at the surface, or near surface there through northwest Canada and the interior. So the greatest threat for any turbulence on Sunday will be associated with the low circulation that's just north of the eastern Aleutians and the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Surface to 4,000 foot turbulence expected over Bristol Bay, the western arm of the Alaska Range down along the peninsula in through, including Kodiak Island, and we'll see another surge of winds coming up from the North Pacific over the same area as we go into Monday and again early on Tuesday.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact, the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward within the bay. It was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources, and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global, international scale. And most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place. Because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. Being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and now let's look at the marine weather segment of our show, starting with the sea ice. The ice certainly continues to melt off. We still have the areas of pack ice, and along the shore fast ice is also tending to melt off and just beginning to break off here. In the sense that where we are at the season, we expect this area now through the lower Chukchi Sea to really begin to start opening up here as we go through the end of May. Further south down through the Bering Strait, we see larger areas opening up along Norton Sound, the eastern Russian coast, and as we go further south, we still have some pack ice floating out here even in through the north central areas of the Bering Sea, but this will all continue to further melt off now the closer we get toward summer solstice. Areas of the southeastern panhandle, winds will be southerly, the middle and upper channels, Lynn Canal, waves running 2 to 3 feet with south winds at 10 to 15 knots. Northwest wind 15 knots around Ketchikan with waves 2-3 feet. The outer coast, winds generally up near 20 knots with waves running 6 to 5 feet within 15 nautical miles of shore. And then for areas of the panhandle for the inner channels on Monday, winds will be southerly there, Lynn Canal, 15 knots, waves 3 feet, and then northwesterly 15 to 20 knots, Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance with waves of 3 to 4 feet. The outer coast winds generally in the 15 to 20 knot range with waves of 6 feet, with winds just a little lighter there near and west of Yakutat Bay. Across the northwestern Gulf, variable winds around 10 knots off the Kenai coast, Prince William Sound in the upper portion of Cook Inlet, waves in Prince William Sound a couple of feet. However, easterly winds of 25 to 30 knots at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves of 5 to 7 feet. And on Monday, winds will pick up a bit there at the entrance of Cook Inlet. Could see 35 knot easterly gales with waves of 8 to 10 feet. Still variable variable winds up around Prince William Sound at 10 knots, waves 2 feet, and northeast winds out of the upper portion of Cook Inlet, including Turnagain Arm, at about 15 knots with 3-foot waves. Now, on Sunday, winds across Kodiak Island will be about 20 to 25 knots out of the southeast to east. And as we drop down through the peninsula, winds will generally have a southeasterly component there at 20 to as high as 25 knot easterly wind there in Bristol Bay. Waves generally 5-6 feet there east of Sand Point, Chicknick. On the backside here through the Bering Sea, waves of 4 to 5 feet. On Monday, stronger low is going to kind of pull up across this region. And ahead of it, circulation, we have winds of 30 to 35 knots across Kodiak Island, waves 9 feet Shelikof Strait, over 10 feet as you get offshore of Kodiak Island. Winds on the backside of it turn more toward the west, 25 knots, and even variable around 10 knots near the one of the kind of troughs or low centers there north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutians, relatively lighter winds, either variable or around 10 to 15 knots out of the northeast to east. Waves 3 to 4 feet on the North Pacific side and generally near 4 feet on the Bering side. And for Monday, we'll find still variable winds around 10 knots here, the eastern Aleutians and west of Adak. But northwesterly winds, Nikolsky through Atka at about 15 knots, waves running 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 3 to 5 feet on the Bering side. And then across the southwest coast, look for easterly winds to 30 knots on Sunday, Bristol Bay, northeast winds 25 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, and winds easterly off east-northeast 10 to 15 knots off the lower Yukon Delta, and north winds St. Paul, St. George 20 knots with waves 5 feet. On Monday, winds will generally be easterly here off the mainland, as high as 25 and 30 knots in Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, but 10 to 15 knots Norton Sound down through the lower Yukon Delta. Finally, along the Arctic coast, winds generally have some south or easterly component, 10 knots there, Utqiagvik through Kaktovik. South winds through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait around 15 knots, and generally southerly component to the wind, though lighter, 10 knots out of the southeast on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And as we get into Monday, we expect winds to be south-southwest, 15 to 20 knots rather, Utqiagvik down through Wainwright, and 15 to 20 knots southerly winds through the lower Chukchi Sea, and then winds go northeast to east south of the Bering Strait, 15 to 20 knots north side of St. Lawrence Island, and 10 knots out of the east there within Norton Sound. And then we have that low coming up on Monday, bringing some gale force winds into the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.